Okay, so welcome to the fifth session in a series of webinars that we call Changing the Conversation, which is really a continuation of a conversation that Rosemary and I began on LinkedIn about 18 months ago, and we eventually decided we should just talk to each other. We've known each other for a long time, we did, and then we decided we'd just like to invite other people into the conversation. And that's how we've come to have this series of webinars, Sex Racing Class. And today's is about curriculum, climate, and community. So we are recording. If you don't want to be recorded, by all means turn your video off. We suggest you view in active speaker view. We're going to finish at 5:15. We hope to have time for questions at the end, but please put questions into the chat, and we will, if we can't answer them today, try and get answers to all the questions and send them to you sometime next week when we've edited the recording and that's ready to roll too. If the connection drops out for any reason, and it has done, just try and log in again. It will work. Hope it doesn't happen today, but we are aware that it does happen sometimes. So if everybody is muted, which I think you all are now, we can make a start. Just before we turn to our speakers, that's who they are. You know that. That's why you've come, because you've seen them speaking, Richard, Lubna, and Bennie. One of the things that started this conversation was I post graphs quite often about pupil achievement and how different kinds of groups of pupils achieve differently and differently in different parts of the country. Now that kind of doesn't work with today, but nonetheless, I found something interesting on the BBC website, which is what young people think about climate change. Well, I thought I found something. Yes, I did find something interesting. So I found that 45% of them are actually have feelings about the climate that affects their daily lives, their daily sense of security, I suppose. The number that I think humanity is doomed is slightly higher at 56%.
It's worrying.
And very worried or extremely worried, 60%. Sorry, humanity's doing 56, very worried. And what's really, I think the percentage I think the future is frightening is exactly 3/4 of them. So we've got a lot to talk about. Climate is having a big impact on how pupils feel. So that's why we're doing today. So our first speaker is Richard Dunne, who's this is one of those terrible moments, Richard, where I don't have written down what your job title is, but I think you're the director or the chief executive of the Harmony project, which I really didn't know about until I visited our second speaker, Lubna's school, where I saw it in action in classrooms. So Richard, you're going to talk to us about the big picture, why you're doing it, what you're trying to achieve. And then later we'll be able to talk to Lubna about how it works in her school, and then we'll talk to Bennie. So over to you, Richard.
Well, thank you, Graham, and thank you, Rosemary. It's great to be with you today. And it's a fascinating conversation. Those statistics are pretty sobering, aren't they? And I also heard a UNESCO report came out last week, and it said that around half the curriculum or curricula of the world don't make any reference to climate change. So half the children of the world are not getting any learning and any education on climate change as things stand. So yeah, there's a lot we need to do. And the scary statistics and the fear that creates in young people is something we mustn't underestimate, and we must do something about that. So today I want to bring a message of hope, and it's a message of hope based on harmony. So let me just share my screen with you. I'm going to run through quite a few slides, but I'm going to do them fairly quickly, and then give you a sense of this work of the Harmony Project. So Harmony, and just as a way of background, I'm a head teacher of 18 years standing. I stepped out of that role 2 years ago to set up the Harmony Project, and I'm working with wonderful people like Lubna here today in exploring this new way of learning. It's not actually a new way of learning, but it's certainly a different way of contextualizing the learning that we do. So as we've just heard, our world is changing fast. Climate change is a reality. It's not in the future. Lots of people are telling us it's here and now. So we need to reimagine education to address these challenges. It's what our children are asking us to do. So this book, which came out 2 years ago, is based on harmony in education. And if I draw your attention lower down to the final sentence, we support teachers and other educators in developing practices that reframe learning around natural laws and principles that show the world as an interconnected whole, and which provide children and all learners with the skills needed to co-create a future that enables all life to flourish, which is obviously what we all want, whether it's people or the natural world. We want life to flourish. If I asked you what harmony means, I wonder what you would say. Here are a few thoughts for you. So we'd probably reference the idea that harmony is about balance. It's about wholeness. It's systemic and cyclical. It's diverse and inclusive. It connects the individual to the whole, the one and the oneness. And as we see in the world around us, it's beautiful in its outcomes. So it's set on universal laws or principles, and they're eternal, these principles. They teach us a new way of learning to live. I met someone called Jim Garrison, who runs an online university called Ubiquity University recently. And he said, if we don't start with the fundamental principles of life, we will go astray. And many of the issues and problems we're facing are based on a lack of understanding of these principles. So let me just run through them with you. There are 7, and 6 of them frame 6 projects of learning each year in a school. But of course, you can be creative around that. And the 7th one runs through all the work. So the first principle is this principle of interdependence, that everything is connected. And when we understand how this works, for example, in a bee colony or a beehive, or in an ecosystem or in a community, we start to see the world in terms of systems and relationships. So bees are brilliant at teaching us the systemic nature of all life. And we see that bees pollinate flowers, flowers provide nectar for bees. So that for all that we talk about competition, the world is also extremely collaborative. And the more we research this, the more we find out that this is true. So if you take a primary curriculum and you look at projects of learning around interdependence, this idea of everything in relationship, here are 7 year groups from reception to year 6 and projects that build that understanding. And what's fascinating is how children start to articulate this language of learning. It becomes a new language for them. They appreciate things in a different way. So if I give you an example of how we would plan out a project, we've got an inquiry question, a principle of harmony. This one is interdependence for bees. A great work outcome, these beautiful hexagonal bee books. We're working with partners in the community to enhance the learning. And there's a sustainability theme running through it. Second principle is this idea of the cycle. We know that natural systems are cyclical. Life works in cycles. And amazingly, they're self-sustaining, self-regulating, and self-limiting. They don't have a teacher telling them what to do. They just intuitively know how to work. So when we understand the cyclical nature of life, then we see that this is a model of sustainability. It keeps going on and on and on. And a great example of this, of course, is food, planting seeds in the ground, as many of you may do with your children. and seeing the magic of something starting to grow, and then harvesting the fruits of that harvest, or the food from the ground. I love this smiling face of the joy of harvest time, and then using that food in school to make recipes and so on. And importantly, these are a group of children who are measuring food waste at the end of lunchtime, and then with a composting facility, composting that food back into the soil. So they understand that there is a system here that is closed loop, and we can feed that goodness into the soil to grow again. We're not throwing anything away. So again, projects of learning that build this sense of cycles in nature, cycles of life, help children understand what we need to create now, which is the circular economy, to put things back in to the system, not throw them away. And our oceans and the plastic we see in our oceans and even in our streets tell us that our systems are not cyclical. I think education generally is really good on diversity. I think we value it, and absolutely so. And we live in a world of extraordinary biodiversity, and it's something that gives systems strength and resilience. So it's always something we should celebrate. So when our children, for example, plant seeds to create a wildflower meadow like this is year 1 children in an area of school. It's not a big area, but it's an area that comes to life with these beautiful colors. They're starting to appreciate diversity in lots of forms. When we look at food, carrots growing in different colors, we appreciate its diversity. And we're realizing more and more, aren't we, that the diversity of the world around us relates to us. The health of the soil relates to the health of our gut biome. We need healthy systems that are diverse. My youngest daughter is autistic, and I learned so much from her because she sees the world differently. And I love this quote: it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a child with autism to raise the consciousness of the village. And the more we appreciate diversity in each other, the better. So projects of learning linked to diversity, really, really important. I took this picture of a mushroom in the wood the other day. And when I came home, I thought, I'll just check how many different fungi there are in the UK. 15,000 different varieties. That is amazing. Fourth principle is this principle of adaptation. We're very conscious of it right now with COVID, with thinking about the future and climate change and adaptation mitigation. What are we going to do? This was a leopard in a zoo. I went to visit a zoo who are interested in harmony, and they had this beautiful leopard. It's a Sri Lankan leopard. I didn't realize there are 9 different kinds of leopard, and this one amazingly adapted to its jungle world, diminishing jungle world. So how do we take these brilliant designs in nature, the bee honeycomb on the left here, and create things in our own worlds, like this dome at the Eden Project in Cornwall that replicates these brilliant designs? And of course, a lot of our learning in terms of adaptation needs to be about our place, our community, our people, our landscapes. When we connect to our place, it makes so much more sense to our children. I worry that a lot of children learn about stuff so far away that doesn't necessarily relate to their world. And the more we can connect it to their world, the better. Also, a lot of our learning is backward looking. There's nothing wrong with history. History is a fascinating subject. But our young people are telling us, organizations like Teach the Future, that we need to be looking ahead as well, thinking about where we're going and adapting the way we live to live more sustainably. So if we create projects of learning year by year and ask our children to make sense of this idea of adaptation, particularly in relation to their communities, then they'll probably want to contribute in some way to that. And we know that when any of us have an identity to our place, we want to be part of it. We want to feed into it. So the sixth projects and principles is this idea of health. It's probably the most important thing in our lives, isn't it? And we've been very conscious of it of late. This idea that we all want to be healthy, and what does it mean to be healthy in lots of different ways. So when we understand health, not just one element of health like physical fitness, but health in its interrelated dimensions, the mind, the body, the spirit. We know that, again, this joined upness of understanding is really important. What's fascinating is when you ask children beyond base needs of having clean water and good food and being safe, when you ask them what helps them to be well, they tell us things like this: when they're valued, when they realize their potential, when they care for others, connect to nature, and have time to think, reflect, or pray. And if we ask them what kind of world they want, sustainable future-wise, they also have a very strong and clear view. They want to live in healthy communities. They want things to be fair, to live in peace. They want their systems to be clean, no waste or pollution. They want nature to thrive, and they want to grow as leaders. So projects of learning that build this idea of play and health and healthy ways to travel, and how do we look after ourselves and our bodies to be well, what's the best food to eat, and so on, exploring health in other parts of the world. It's a great journey to go on, and one that all of us never stop learning about. The final principle then is this principle of oneness, that we are nature, we are part of this one whole, this one world. And however we understand that, whether it's through a sense of God or Mother Earth, this sense of oneness and being part of something greater is really important. I love this message on this gate. It's in a place up in Scotland, and it simply says, "Be still and know." So finding time in our busy lives is to be still and know is not always easy, is it? And yet when we do that, we always feel a whole lot better for it. I was listening to someone the other day who meditates every day, and he said, when I have a really, really busy day, I meditate twice as long. And it feels like all of us need a bit of that, don't we, in our lives? This is a picture in northern India, in Ladakh. And I love this girl's face. It's just a picture of peace from her morning meditation in her school. So in our busy school worlds and education and so on, how do we help our young people just to stop and to be? So principles and projects that link to this idea of oneness, helping us to see our place in the world, to find our place and our peace, is the final of the 6 projects of learning. Obviously in the UK here, we have 6 half terms, so it fits very nicely, but it can be adapted. And Lubna, I'm sure, will explain some other ways in which she has brilliantly with her staff developed this approach. I could have shared lots of quotes with you, but I just wanted to give you a sense from this, this set of quotes, what this work means to young people, because they really do start to articulate things differently. And some of these quotes are beautiful, aren't they? Oneness is living in harmony with everyone and everything. It's about working in unity and diversity. So the 7th principle, which may be a surprise to you, is this idea of geometry, that there in geometry means earth measure, so that there is a measure to the earth, a pattern to life that we see everywhere. This is a winter berry here just locally to me here, just the other day, with its beautiful pentagon shape. And it's the same as a pentagon form in the cross section of a carrot. And it's the same as this amazing image of the orbit of Earth and Venus around the sun, which creates a 5-petaled flower, which is replicated in the tiny petal form of a flower in a wood. And when we look at this Fibonacci spiral, the spiral of growth, as many of you know, we see it as a spiral in a fern or a shell. We see it in cloud formations, even in the galaxies of the stars. But we also see it in our curled up finger. So we can see that the patterns and proportions of the world around us reference us as well. This is also a great quote. From a systems point of view, the understanding of life and nature begins with the understanding of pattern. And from my experience, watching children observe the patterns of nature and then seeing how those patterns around them relate to them is a very powerful message in their understanding of their place in the world. So at the end of all these projects, this idea of a great work, something that celebrates the learning, is really important. Whether it's an exhibition, something made, some food, a mosaic, a performance, dance, music. It doesn't matter. And in fact, the diversity of different outcomes is really key. So I'll just give you a quick flavor in my last couple of minutes of how this work sets out. This is a year one overview of learning. So you've got a principle, an inquiry, and a sustainability theme running through that, and a message linked to that work. Here's year four, and their similar project around how to link their learning together over the different principles and inquiries in a slightly different order, which is good. And when the teachers plan it, they plan it out like this: inquiry, principle, great work. Who are the partners in the community who can help? And what's the sustainability theme? And then each of the subjects feeds into this project. So if you're in a primary school and you have 6 half terms and 7 year groups, there are opportunities to explore a positive future for people and planet around 42 inquiries. I love this quote: "We need to be asking not what sort of planet we are leaving our children, but what sort of children we are leaving our planet," and getting the balance right. So harmony, very simply, with all these principles joining up, is when everything works together. So that's my email. If you want to send me a message, I'd be delighted to hear from you. And that's the Harmony Project website address right there. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Let me just come out. I hope I kept to time. And, yeah, anything anyone wants to ask?
Thank you very much for that, Richard. I'm just going to ask Rosemary first if she wants to comment on that wonderfully, I thought, easy to follow description of something that's actually incredibly complex.
Yes.
Absolutely. I just found it a beautiful presentation, Graham. Thank you so much, Richard.
Oh, my pleasure.
You know, it feels quite spiritual listening to you talking about nature and us as human beings being connected and needing to connect with ourselves, our communities, and the natural world. And it feels really timely. It just feels really timely in this time of reset and chaos and fear and not knowing and feeling disconnected. It just feels really wholesome. It feels like an organic piece of spiritual nourishment. And it's going to link so well to what Lubna, you know, because as Graham said, Lubna is going to talk about how your beautiful harmony project materializes in her.
Rosemary did warn us earlier that she might disappear. We hope she doesn't have to move, because she's actually at the moment visiting her mother, and apparently in the place where her mother lives, sometimes you can hear the bingo caller who comes in to help out. So we'll let Rosemary come back. In the meantime, I know you've got a dash, Richard. Thank you so much again for that.
Pleasure.
And we'll send you any questions that we get to answer. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for having me. And if anyone wants to follow up, please do. I think what Rosemary said was so important, and we do need to rethink things. And I know Lubna is going to share some examples of this practice. And thank you, Lubna, for all your support and enthusiasm for this work. Look forward to seeing you again soon. I'm sorry I can't be with you for the second half.
Okay, thanks, Richard. So if we can turn to Lubna, who's speaking at a second consecutive webinar in this series, because some of what she said to us at the last one, which was about Muslim achievement, about her curriculum, was fascinating. As I happen to vaguely know her school, because I lived quite near it for a long time, I went to see it in July to see what this kind of curriculum actually looks like in practice. And it was a wonderful eye-opener. So, Lubna, tell us more.
Thank you very much, Graham, and thank you for having me as part of this webinar. I feel quite honoured to be able to share part of what Richard has talked about, so there might be some bits of repetition, but certainly share what's going on in the school and share why we think it's so important, not only for our school, but for our wider community. So I will endeavour to share my screen. I hope you can see the screen there. Just give me a little nod if you can. Fabulous, thank you. So I'm going to look at some examples of what we've been doing in the school, and I hope you find it of interest. So why did we decide to go down this route? Ofsted and everybody else at DFE are all talking about, funnily enough, deep learning, sticky learning, the need for the curriculum to be sequential, coherent, and most of all, connected to real life. So what better connection than nature? And particularly everything that's going on in the world, the introduction that Graham started with, that children, young people are actually really, really worried about the future. So it seems oddly logical that you would start to bring this into the education of children so that you are preparing them for the future, not just to pass exams. So this is part of the reason we decided to embark on this journey and to get children talking. And it's interesting, even very, very young children feel they want to say and they want to talk about their feelings and what they know and then what they go on to find out. So some of our children, when we first started this about 3 years ago, started looking at climate change, its effect, looking at ecosystems, as we started to introduce the principles of harmony into our curriculum. What you see there is a picture of children actually at City Hall, you know, making a bit of noise, having things to say. And these were children in year 4, I believe, at the time. So, you know, once they understand what is going on, they become really quite passionate, which is wonderful. So as Richard's already talked about the principles of harmony, and if you look at the face of this young boy, I don't know if you can see my mouse, this picture of awe and wonder. We actually brought bees into the school. The beekeeper brought them in the back of his car, God bless him. And our children, completely fearless, went right up to the bees, were absolutely mesmerized by them. And this is what we want. We want children to be mesmerized by learning. We want them to understand that what they're learning actually connects to things that will impact on their lives in the future. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of the principles and how we use them in the school. So there is no better designer than nature. And we've just heard about how nature naturally is cyclical. Nothing goes to waste and everything is recycled, and the situation just continues. There's no beginning, there's no end. So the children decided to look at plastic, and what you see in one of the pictures here is a collection, I think it was over half a term, of plastic bottles, and actually you can't see the whole picture. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plastic bottles that were collected, and then we called the parents in, you know, the whole community got together, and it was an awesome sight. And all of these bottles would go to waste. So the children decided to do a project and design a bottle each that they would keep throughout their time at the school, or certainly for much longer than a day or a drinking session. And they became actually quite passionate. The project just took a life of its own. Biomimicry was mentioned by Richard, and one of the things that help us to think about sustainable solutions, and again the children are very involved in this, is how nature, we can learn from nature about how nature does recycle its waste, and how we might then copy this and to find solutions of our own. So a couple of examples. Richard mentioned the Eden project, which you haven't heard about. It is certainly something worth looking at. So this structure you hear in the bottom picture is based on bubbles. So these are actual bubbles, and this whole construction was based on that, and you can see the hexagonal shape as well, which apparently mathematically is a very natural shape. It's a very cost-effective, in the sense, naturally cost-effective shape, which is why you see it in honeycombs and other places in nature. So children learn about this, these kind of mimicking of nature to enable sustainable living. We've also talked a lot about waste in nature, the fact that everything gets recycled, and children are now having mini investigations right across the school. And I'll give a little bit of an indication of how we built that into our curriculum, where children can link science to literacy, to history, to geography. And we have very good international links. So we've also got connections with schools in other countries, in the Far East, in the Middle East, in Asia, just to see how people manage life in villages, lives in cities, and how people are beginning to really think creatively about sustainability. Our school, it was completely concrete. We had no green spaces whatsoever, not even a blade of grass. So we managed to get some money about 10 years ago, and the whole community got involved in creating green spaces. So we have a little jungle at the back of our school in one building, and we have some amazing growing spaces in our other building. And it's just taken a life of its own. What you see down here are some of our PTA members having a geometry lesson. So we got everybody involved. The children have regular lessons, geometry, and I will show you how that links to the wider curriculum. But we really did drag everybody in, kicking and screaming. The principle of geometry, I personally found exceptionally fascinating. Mathematics has been my thing. I'm not an artist by any means, but I can do straight lines and I can use angles and draw circles with, with instruments. So this for me was fascinating. And this journey actually began when I did a course at the Prince's Foundation, a geometry course, which really opened my eyes. And I'm going to show you one of the first things I came across. Richard alluded to this a moment ago. It's a very, very short clip. Just watch what happens. So you've got the dance of Earth and Venus around the sun. I think this orbit takes about 8 years. So there you have it, on a huge scale, and sorry, just go back to that, on a micro level, where you see these little cells, which also have definitive shapes. So maths is everywhere, and I showed my children, I forgot to put the link on, there's a Donald Duck in Mathematics Land. It's fantastic. It's really old. It's about 25, 30 years old, but it is brilliant. And I highly recommend you showing it to your children, watching it yourselves. Absolutely brilliant. So what did we do? We decided to follow the Harmony principles, to focus on inquiry questions, which were overarching questions, and all elements of curricula would feed into this overarching question. So children could link the inquiry to science, to literacy, to history, to geography, to art, and geometry. And so Richard has alluded to some of the planning. This comes directly from the book that Richard had pointed out earlier in his presentation. So some examples of where we might have projects under each of the principles. And again, if anybody wanted to look at these, I'd be very happy to share and direct you as to where to get them. This is our curriculum map for year 3, and I apologize, it's probably quite small and difficult to see. So this is part of it. Where you see things in green are elements of where we've started to embed inquiries of learning directly related to the principles. Where you see red, these are general inquiry-based questions, which also have a link also to Harmony. And in terms of the principle running across the school, this is how we have developed them. We've got our questions, and we've got each of the principles running across each of the half terms. And the principle of geometry, which we've only just introduced, starting in our infant school. We're in the process of an amalgamation. We're a junior school, we're amalgamating with the infant school. And so children from a very, very young age will get the ruler skills, using the compass to draw circles, and to really get to grips with geometry. In Richard School, they were very, very advanced. I was really impressed by the children, even in year 2 and 3, at their manual dexterity. It was absolutely amazing how skilled they were in using instruments to draw and create these wonderful shapes. Some of the inquiries of learning that we've introduced in the school, bees and why they're so brilliant. Richard alluded to that project earlier on. And again, we have our overview of the curriculum, which is still a work in process. We are about 3 years into this curriculum, and it's really now beginning to embed itself as teachers really understand the subject knowledge is developing, and children actually are now very, very articulate in many of the areas of harmony. The principle of oneness was something Richard also alluded to, and I've got another little video to show you that, and this was created by year 6 children a couple of years ago when they started a project looking at child soldiers, and it was a topic they picked themselves. They presented this at Wembley Conference Centre, or was it Wembley Arena, I can't remember, as part of a much, much bigger project. If it doesn't bring tears to your eyes, I'll be very surprised, and I might start weeping myself. Do excuse me.
When you try your best but you don't succeed, when you get what you want but not what you need, when you feel so tired but you can't sleep, stuck in reverse, and the tears come streaming down your face, when you lose something you can't replace, when you love someone but it goes to waste, could it be worse?
Okay, so that whole slide was created by Year 6 children who went off and did their research and put it together and presented this to a very, very large audience. What I then wanted to share with you was just the notion that, you know, everybody in our community is involved. The children make so much noise about everything. It's wonderful. You can't ignore their voices. So in a school, we've obviously got our teachers planning and they're teaching. The governors are very supportive and they encourage, they must get involved, have a governor that's part of the Harmony project or the Harmony curriculum. Our parents and our PTA are also very, very involved. Oops, my lights go out if I sit too still. And our students, we have a group of students called Eco Warriors who run various recycling projects across the school, and even our school council have an element of harmony and looking at sustainability. And lots of our former students come and join in. They come and do their placements here and support our students that way. Everybody has a role. In terms of our partners, the Princess Foundation, and I've listed some of the people that we've worked with, and the list just goes on. International links, we are very lucky that we've got links in Beijing, in Bangkok, in India, Pakistan, and South Africa. And some of the things that they're doing in schools there are absolutely amazing. And it's maybe because some of the schools don't have the resources that we have, that they have to think even more creatively. And systems that they run are mind-blowingly natural, simple, and cost-effective. And I think there's a lot to be learnt. So very happy to talk to anybody who's interested in the Harmony project. I'm sure Richard would also make time to speak to people. And that's really the nitty-gritties of this presentation. Thank you very much for listening. There's so much more, but I've tried to keep it as concise as possible. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lubna. Kind of, when you talked about the jungle, it reminded me of when I came to see you. And the jungle is just a lovely place. It's kind of, sometimes it's serene and quiet, but also there can be lots of children doing exciting things there. And one of the things that strikes me about the presentation you've done is that sometimes people think that kind of curriculum is a bit fluffy and they associate it with fluffy places. But for me, it's kind of incredibly rigorously organized. And the one thing I wouldn't ever say about South Acton is that it's fluffy. It's predominantly social housing. I don't know what percentage of your pupils live in a property owned by their parents, but I suspect it's fairly low.
It was in the past. It's changing now. The commercial companies have come over and you know, it was a very, very, very close community, and still is to a large degree, although even that's changing. So watch this space, I suppose.
So thank you, Rosemary.
Oh, thank you so much, Lubna. My internet connection went down, but I was able to, I've relocated, so I'm now in a public space. So I'm hoping that there's not too much echo, but I caught the end of your beautiful, beautiful presentation. I've known Lubna now for over, I think it must be about 25 years ago that we first met when I was working in the London Borough of Waltham Forest as an advisor and a very reluctant Ofsted inspector. And I have to say, there's certain people that you're kind of drawn to in different incarnations, and Lubna was one of them. I am not surprised in 2021 that she's leading a school with such a beautiful curriculum, you know, that actually connects young people to the world that they're a part of. So thank you so much, Lubna. It's brilliant. And I'm very, very much looking forward now to Bennie. And Bennie Kara is somebody that I've come across very, very recently. But when we were pulling together this webinar, it just seemed fitting to have somebody like Bennie. And what I know that she's going to bring are some narratives that will, and the role of narrative in terms of weaving some of those principles that both Richard and Lubna have spoken about. And in particular, I like the interconnectedness and the connectedness that we have with one another. So Bennie, please, we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And of course, I have the graveyard shift, so I hope I've got everybody's attention still. If you do feel the need to make a cup of tea while I'm talking, I promise I won't be offended. So I'm going to share my screen to make sure that you can see what I'm talking about. And today, my presentation is not specifically about the climate, it's about human beings. And while I've been listening to the presentations that have come before me, both Lubna's and Richard's, so much resonated in the language that's used around harmony when we think about the power of stories and how human beings are connected to one another. So I guess the principle this really speaks to is this idea of oneness. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how important stories were to me as a child in understanding the world that I lived in. And I come at this presentation with the idea that if we do not have enough stories about the world that we live in, how on earth can we be compelled to look after it and the people who live in it? And so I'm going to talk you through the idea of diversity and the diversity of stories. And I start with the conundrum, I suppose, of storytelling and diverse storytelling. And for teachers in particular, we straddle this really fine line between confronting realities in our stories around our history, around our culture, around our past. And the idea that we have to present truth without sanitizing what's happened in our histories, the contribution of our country to global history, what we've done on a global level that means education, climate, social justice, has been affected profoundly. And then we have the other side of that line is actually being able to present marginalized groups as having agency and being multidimensional. And the reason we might want to do this is that idea of oneness, to create that social and cultural connection. And I think of a really brilliant example that I read about, and it was presented by UNICEF. And it was the story of two girls, one who lives in modern day Britain and one who lives in Bangladesh. And the idea behind the activity that they proposed was, how is the action of this one person in the UK, this one child in the UK, relevant to the child that's living in Bangladesh, a place where climate change is causing havoc? A place that actually is at real risk when we think about climate change in terms of flooding in particular. How are their stories connected? And the reason we might want their stories to be connected is this idea of empathy. Because if we are to campaign together, and if we are to build a legacy of justice for the planet, we have to be able to understand somebody else's story, the impact of our actions on their lives. And that means we have to have a sense of empathy. And I love this kind of explanation of empathy by Claire Patey. And she talks about the idea that stories have a transformative power. It allows us to see the world in a different way than if we do it than we've just encountered on our own. So, if we leave children to formulate their own stories, they will use information that comes at them from all sorts of different directions and perhaps form inaccurate stories or unhelpful stories. To be able to create a sense of empathy and to not have this kind of grouped mentality of people, we have to be able to know their stories. And why would we be compelled to have climate change measures in our schools and to care about nature and to care about plastic waste when actually we have no understanding of the individual that lives on the other side of the planet, same age as us, perhaps in the same educational stage as us? If we cannot empathize with them, we only see them as Bangladeshis as opposed to an individual whose life is affected. So storytelling is hugely important in this idea of empathy, because we have to form social schema as we're growing up. And rather than thinking about people as victims, we must start to grow our understanding of people and our place in the story. And if all of our chosen stories tell us that certain people are victims, then how do we formulate that growth? How do we recognize the value of a person on the other side of the planet or sitting next to us in the classroom when we haven't got the relevant social schema, we haven't got the detailed stories about them to be able to form this identity for ourselves? And I'll give you an example of this. So let's take Africa, this wonderful continent that is so misunderstood throughout history. So my earliest understanding of Africa, ironically being East African Asian, had no impact on my understanding of Africa as a child. I was born here, my parents and grandparents were born in Africa. But my understanding was through the charity campaigns of the 1980s, when Africans, in my head, looked like this young boy. They looked like this child. And the idea that an African would wear a business suit and work in an office was as alien as, you know, somebody from Mars, because that's the story that we were told. And then the story continued around, Africans and African history. Well, that was entirely embedded into the narrative of slavery. And even as I grew older, we were exposed to kind of the more political information. The information that I received was about civil rights, and the image of Emmett Till and his broken body was imprinted into my consciousness. So my understanding of Africans was that there was no agency, that we were rescuers somehow, and there wasn't a connection between my life and theirs. And we were doing environmental projects, but we had no concept of how we worked in the UK and the impact that had across the globe. And how sad is that for children not to understand? And it's lovely to hear about the international links that Lubna's made through her school, so that children can have that global perspective and not just see people as victims, but as people with agency who might be like us. And it requires this sense of honesty. So when we create a curriculum that is diverse, we are allowing honesty into our lives and our discourse. And I'm turned to this idea of the First Nations residential schools, a tragic tale. But interestingly, what came out of that and what has come out of that over the years is the idea of truth and reconciliation, words that are familiar if you are familiar with the history of apartheid. And the questions around what happened in the First Nations residential schools were very much about finding a truth together. And what opportunities do our children have to confront the realities of our actions in the UK, not just in terms of history, but as we are now? What opportunity do we have to speak truth around what is the impact that has had globally on societies? And it raises questions about empire and colonial history as well. What did we do and what did we instill in people that meant that, we have some very, very, very difficult situations when it comes to waste and resources, and kind of social assimilation of ideas around greed and consumerism. So that's a really interesting one to think about. And you relate that to the idea of statues as well. Why do we appreciate what we do? How does that relate to the idea of oneness in particular? And empire is a particularly interesting one about impact. It's an example of how when we teach children what we say is substantive truth, that perhaps that's not the perspective, that's not the only perspective that they can have. So the truth that I was told as a child growing up is that empire was a real positive force and that it civilized the world. We didn't talk about the impact on the environment or the exploitation of the land or the people, and the idea of racial superiority around capitalism and the impact that has had over generations, and how India actually in particular exists today. So we think about storytelling and what stories we tell. We sometimes omit details because it's uncomfortable. And as educators, we have to live in a space of discomfort sometimes to be able to tell stories that are more accurate and that allow multiple coexisting narratives. I'm going to skip over this one. I want to talk about how interconnectedness is relevant and kind of relates to this idea of the young Bangladeshi girl as well. So when we tell stories about people, what do our students know of this man? Do they see what the media sees? Do they know anything about his history or culture? Do they know anything about the Middle East and the climate and resource usage and waste and consumerism there? Do they have perhaps a very skewed perspective around this man just in purely in terms of his religion? Or do they understand that he's descended from cartographers, medical practitioners, you know, a whole host of wonderful things? Because if they knew that, it's more easy to empathize. It's more easy to value human life when you recognize the depth and history of a story. So this is where I'm talking about the need for better stories in our curriculum so that he can be known and we can find ways of understanding the impact of our actions here. And storytelling is intrinsically related to motivation. So if you think about stories compelling people to take action, there's no greater powerful way of making children understand the urgency of our situation, not just for us, but for people like us around the globe. Storytelling is the most important step in the evolution of human learning, and it's our most important social lever as well. When we're trying to create a sense of belonging, a sense of motivation, a compelling for action, we use stories to be able to get to that point. And in subjects, that appears in lots of different ways. And for me, I'm fascinated by the knowledge of the earth, of different stories and different cultures. We kind of think of our understanding of climate as a very white Western European thing. But if you think about some of the stories that we see in subjects that are about science and climate and geography, it's fascinating. You know, this idea that the human body has been used as a kind of tally mark, as a mathematical instrument. The idea that when we think about our constellations, that's not just, you know, Greek and Roman construction. The Dogon people of Mali were talking about Sirius A and Sirius B a long time ago. And the idea of medicine, and especially particularly natural medicine, and the role of the world, and the role of natural resources in medicine in ancient civilizations. So they exist there. And the fact that the world was mapped not just by Mercator, you know, the world has been mapped by geographers from all sorts of backgrounds. Al-Idrisi being the advisor to King Roger II of Sicily and creating one of the most important maps of our planet that was in existence at the time. And how the earth has been manipulated to use as protection for people. We learn about the Benin bronzes, but what about the Benin earthworks that were such a powerful force of engineering? And within this art, you know, the idea of mark making and symbolism and representation, and actually being careful to avoid this the description of this art as primitive, because what we want our children to see is that people from different backgrounds have manipulated the earth in lots of different ways, in really positive ways, and have contributed to an understanding of our climate, of our globe, of our geography in ways that perhaps we haven't been taught in schools, and how better to create a sense of empathy than that. And if we are thinking about agency, this is slightly aside from climate related activity, but political activity. The idea that we have agency is so important, and that our children from different backgrounds can also see that people in their past have had agency. So, you know, the importance of flagging up the political resistance of Sophia Dalip Singh or the Rani of Jhansi. So when we think about children as campaigners for climate change, for social justice, that they can see themselves ourselves in the people that have come before us in their histories. So the takeaways with this, not just around climate, but certainly around our society in general, is that stories create our past, present, and future. And we have to think about the narratives that we choose, because they will serve to motivate and create empathy. There's a huge argument around climate change in particular, which is about, well, I'm not reducing my plastic consumption in this country if India and China are spewing fumes into the air. And there seems to be this schism between groups of people that we can start to eradicate from learning those stories much earlier on. And it is hard to avoid that victimhood, confronting realities balance, but that discomfort is natural. But judicious selection of multiple perspectives allows for that diverse content to be meaningful, for our children to be global citizens and truly feel like they have agency. Stories are fundamental, and I hope that your curriculum would reflect the richness of those stories to allow for children to see the world they live in its true glory. And I'm going to pause there.
Oh my goodness, what a fabulous presentation, Bennie. What a fabulous presentation. Graham, I think we've done it again. 3 fabulous presentations, Richard, Lubna, and Bennie. And for me, you know, it just gives hope to those educators who are out there who are just trying to find a way, especially in our current political climate, to actually engage with young people and the communities from where they are from in a globally respectful and humanly connected way. And if that's all that we can do through narratives, through things like the Harmony Project, if that's all that we can do in our schools at this time, I think we will be doing our schools and our children and our communities a great service in this time of disruption and disconnect. I love the way that you use narrative, and I love the way that you connected the narrative of people to the broader context in terms of us looking at climate, because they are interdependent. People and climate are interdependent. And in order for us to really do what we need to do as a community as regards climate change, then we do have to understand the way that we connect with what's happening in my part of the world where I'm from. I mean, I'm sitting in Birmingham at the moment, but I actually live in Jamaica. And climate change is having massive impact in Jamaica and in the Caribbean islands and that part of the world. And the only way that Lubna's children, students, are going to be able to connect with the kids in Jamaica like they connect with the kids in Bangladesh and other parts of the global South is to understand their stories. So the power of story is really, really key. Thank you so much, Bennie. I don't know whether there are any questions. I think people have just been gorging themselves on this feast that we've had tonight, Graham. What say you?
I think it's almost as if every time I need some inspiration, I talk to you, Rosemary, about the next webinar, and somehow it happens, and we just get these amazing speakers.
I know.
Who just take us, show us a world where we can inspire children. And that is just so lovely to have that experience on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Just a joy.
Please look at the chat, Bennie. You'll see that people have been putting things in. Lubna, you know, thank you so much. I just love the fact, and of course, these are both people who are still in those beautiful places called schools and managing to kind of reinvent what school now needs to be. Oases, places of light, places that are looking forward, places that are you remember that slide that you put up right at the beginning, Graham, which was so scary to see kids being so frightened of the future. And I can't imagine children in Bennie's school or Lubna being afraid of the future. You know, I can see them looking forward to the future that they are a part of. It's absolutely fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And the other thing that I wanted to say is really about this interconnectedness of the world. Those of you who know me will know that one of my big things is talking about the global majority, kind of shifting from that kind of deficit narrative that Bennie referred to, definitely around colonialism and around the global South. Because the peoples that have been racialized and minoritized through colonization and capitalism are the global majority. They're the global majority on the planet. And so if we are going to be able to connect and reconnect and reset, then we need to be able to look at things from a global perspective. And I think schools that may be a little bit scared about the pushback around decolonizing our curriculums and so on could learn a lot through what Bennie talks about in terms of story and what Lubna talks about in terms of harmony. Lubna, I feel you have something to say. Please come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Bennie, thank you. That was really, really very, very inspirational. And talking about curriculum, so we've got the harmony curriculum going on the one side, looking at everything that we're looking at, but the points that you made were very, very salient, because there is another side to curriculum development, looking at those very aspects. Because if we're looking at a school typical like ours, typical of a London school, very, very mixed, very multicultural, and children needing to know their history, where they fit into this whole thing. I mean, I'm talk about myself and my history and my parents and partition and India and Pakistan and all of that. And there are now more conversations about how we manage the curriculum and how the curriculum needs to be relevant for our children in the schools that they're in. So there's a lot of talk about that going on now, very rigorous, very high level thought. And I think what we're expecting our children to do as a result of this is to really think, not just absorb facts and information to pass an exam, but really think about what they're hearing, about what they're learning, and about how it relates to them, their families, their wider situation. So I think the work that you've alluded to is incredibly important. And I'm pleased to say it's happening in schools. There are huge conversations like this going on. I came from a visit to another school this morning, looking at that very thing, and we were talking about a history topic about Baghdad and the transatlantic slavery and all of that. So these things are going to happen very, very soon. They're in the process. Thank you.
And you know, Lubna's in London, as she said. London is seen as one of the most diverse cities on the planet Earth. So if we can't get it right in London, we just haven't got a chance anywhere else, Lubna. We just haven't got a chance. And for your kids to know that actually, you know, 72.3% of London children and students are from the global majority. So calling them ethnic minorities, that doesn't position them in the story. They're not in character, they're out of character. And there's something to be said about that, because I'm just finished writing my book, and I was relying on Graham to give me some of the data in London so I could be up to date in terms of the data. And the way now that the data is collected in London, a kind of, you know, it's very difficult for you to get that very clear sense that 72.3% of children and students in London are from global majority communities. And that shifts the narrative completely. You know, that shifts it from the edge into the center. And so that's why it's so important for your kids to know that. And to see themselves as the narrators of their stories, having agency, as Bennie says, because of their deep, deep cultural histories that is embedded in the soils on which they stand, you know? And so for me, this is magical. It absolutely is absolutely magical. Graham.
Yeah, I was thinking, I've recently managed to get out of the DFE some very interesting data, which they collect but don't publish. So you have to ask them for it. So what I've now got, and I'm working on trying to make sense of, or share what I have, is the data about the languages spoken by the pupils in our schools.
Mm-hmm.
So that there are, I don't know, at least 200 different languages that you can put into the census form. So I've just asked for that data by local authority. And what I've seen so far is fascinating. It's just the scale of it. I don't know how it's happened, but there seems to be a particular interest in the way it's collected in African languages. And we can look at where they're spoken. You look at some of the issues I've talked to Lubna about, the Pakistani community, and there is lots of data about a range of languages in that community as well. Some questions about how accurate some of it is too. So there's a very rich resource there. And I always think, one of the things I think the best lesson I ever taught was one in which I used a pupil's knowledge to recreate the research that linguists did in the 18th century to suggest the existence of something called Indo-European. So the connection between some languages in India, such as Punjabi, Hindu, Urdu, and English and French, which is a much closer connection than the connection they have with languages like Tamil.
Absolutely.
You can teach that in a very dry way, or you can get children to talk about the languages that they have and figure it out for themselves. I don't think, to be honest, you can do that in North Yorkshire. And that's a richness they don't have in their education that we have in London with the kind of pupils we have. And just another thing I find very inspiring when I meet groups of children like that, who've got, each of them probably 3 languages they can operate in.
Mm-hmm.
And letting them think about the connections between those languages could be really powerful.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I was interested in when we were doing the work at University College London around investing in diversity and leadership development was the extent to which all of that richness, that language richness in London, and that was back in 2003 when we were looking at it, how it informs teacher training, how it informs leadership development. And again, we go back to kind of colonial Western mindset that has a hierarchy of which languages are actually important. In Little Jamaica, for example, if you're doing teacher training, because of where we are located in the world, teachers are required to have conversational Spanish. It's part and parcel of how you use that data, and you actually say, well, we're in a part of the world where a lot of people speak Spanish. So teachers have conversational Spanish here in Jamaica. And then you look at University College London, and I bet you the teacher training there is no different to what it was when I trained in the early 1980s, in terms of building on that wealth, that richness, Graham, that is London, and it does speak to a colonial mentality and a kind of sense of superiority in terms of what's important, which languages are important. There are no African languages that you can take at GCSE level in London or anywhere in the UK. None. And what is that about? What is that actually saying? What is it about?
Yeah, it's a wide range of European languages.
Absolutely,
and Arabic and Farsi.
Absolutely,
just Arabic and Farsi.
Just Arabic and Farsi.
Europe.
Absolutely, and of course, when you look back at the division of Africa between the European nations, it was divided according to language. So now you have, the Anglophile countries in language. You have the English speaking countries, and they're defined in that way. They're defined in that way. And in fact, local languages were actually seen to be, the way that it was seen by the colonizers is that if we're going to have an international language, let's have it in the European language. And all the variety of diverse languages were seen as, oh, that's confusing, so let's just have the locals speak in English, or let's just have the locals speak in French, all past the colonial mentality. When people talk about Jamaica, they talk about Jamaica as the largest English-speaking Caribbean island. What is that about? You know, and these are the kinds of questions that we want to be having our children ask of their education. And the mindset that it puts them in, and the way that it removes their agency as global citizens who are the majority on this planet.
One of the other little data sets I managed to get at the DFE is what they call modern foreign language entries and results by the first language of the pupils taking, the recorded first language of the pupils taking the GCSE. And one of the things that's really interesting is that the Polish, it's unsurprisingly, most of the pupils that take it are Polish speakers. I suspect most of the ones who are recorded as English speakers are from second, third generation Polish families. Arabic, however, is hugely diverse.
Mm-hmm.
We know a bit about different kinds of Arabic, but we also find Kurdish speakers probably up there. It's very, very different pattern,
mm-hmm.
which is again telling us that this kind of notion of modern foreign languages that drives our national curriculum is at odds with the way the world is and the linguistic diversity of the country we live in. So we have lots more to do, and there are some ideas for some future webinars. Which, as I say, I just love these because I always feel inspired at the end. And that's a nice job to have, to organise something that makes you feel inspired, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I think we have got a little bit past our finish time. So it's time to say thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to everybody who's been and engaged with us. And hope to see you all again soon at another webinar next time. So bye for now.
Yeah, thank you, Benny. Thank you, Lubna. And thank you for everybody that's joined us. Susan Service, I remember you. It's lovely, 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 lovely to see you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye, bye.